Thousands of people have died in the storm here recently. Thousands, not hundreds. I called a friend up in Pennsylvania and I said, "Jack, how many people died in the storm down here?"
Eustace Conway has lived a life most people can't even imagine, deep in the woods, far from the noise of society, surviving off the land with his own hands, and becoming a symbol of raw independence through the show Mountain Men. People always assumed they knew who he was. The quiet, rugged, self-reliant man who chose nature over comfort, peace over fame, and simplicity over the modern world. But what happened just moments ago, what was discovered inside his barn, has left fans stunned, officials speechless, and the community asking questions no one ever expected to ask, because that barn wasn't just a storage place. It wasn't just shelter for tools, food, or equipment. What was found inside has now changed the way people look at Eustace Conway forever. After years of mystery, rumors, and whispers from those who visited his land, the truth finally came out, and it's nothing like the stories told on television. The discovery was so unexpected, so unsettling, that even those closest to him are struggling to understand how it stayed hidden for so long. Authorities arrived quietly. The area was sealed off, and the few people who witnessed what was uncovered are now describing it as unbelievable, disturbing, and the kind of thing no one ever imagined Eustace was connected to. Fans of Mountain Men always saw him as the wise survivor, the gentle nature teacher, the man who lived with honor and intention. But today, everything has changed. Long before television crews ever set foot on his land, Eustace Conway was already a legend, at least to the people who lived close enough to hear the stories. He wasn't just a man who lived in the woods. He was the kind of person who made people question whether the modern world was really necessary at all. He hunted his own food, built his own shelters, and lived by a code that almost no one today could understand, let alone commit to. Some called him a genius, others called him a hermit. But everyone agreed on one thing. There was always something mysterious about the life he lived, especially the things he never talked about on camera. His 1,000-acre property, known as Turtle Island, became famous when Mountain Men introduced him to millions of viewers. People watched him chop wood, teach apprentices, ride horses, and talk about nature with the calm confidence of someone who didn't just study survival, he lived it. But the show only showed what Eustace allowed the world to see. What the cameras never filmed, what no producer ever questioned, was the one place that almost everyone noticed. But no one was allowed to enter. The old barn, weathered, dark, quiet, and closed off. Even long-time visitors said they never saw the doors open. Whatever was inside stayed inside. For years, rumors circled about what he kept stored there. Some said old tools from generations past. Some believed it contained rare animal hides or artifacts collected from the mountains. Others thought it was just another storage space, nothing more. But the people who lived closest to Eustace, the ones who quietly watched his land from a distance, always said the same thing. He guards that barn like it holds something he can't afford to lose. What no one knew was that they were right. The discovery didn't happen by accident. It wasn't a curious fan, or a wandering hiker, or a friend who stumbled in by mistake. It was something that forced its way into Eustace's life, an outside decision from people who had power, paperwork, and legal authority. A quiet investigation had been building for months, triggered by complaints, questions, and one unexpected report that reached the county. Something about the barn had drawn attention, and once attention turned into documentation, the officials had no choice but to come. No one expected Eustace to cooperate. And he didn't, not at first. He stood firm, calm, and silent, the same way he always did when the modern world tried to push into his life. But this time there was no way to stop it. The barn was unlocked. The doors were opened. And what was inside wasn't just unexpected. It was the kind of discovery that instantly changed the story of who people thought Eustace Conway really was. The people who were there didn't speak much. They didn't make statements. They didn't argue or speculate. They simply stood in silence, staring at what they had uncovered, trying to process how long it had been there and how no one ever knew. For the first time in decades, the barn wasn't a mystery anymore, and that silence, coming from people trained to stay calm in shocking situations, was the clearest sign of all. Whatever they found was never meant to be discovered. No one ever really understood why Eustace Conway guarded that barn more fiercely than anything else on his land. People who worked with him noticed it, but never questioned it out loud. Even longtime friends who helped him build cabins, tan hides, and split logs would say the same thing. You could walk anywhere on his 1,000-acre property except there. He never yelled, never threatened, but the message was clear. That barn was off limits. It was the only place where even nature seemed to fall silent, as if the trees themselves were keeping a secret for him. And for years that silence worked. Nobody pressed, nobody asked, and nobody imagined what was inside. But everything began to change the day the inspectors arrived. It wasn't because Eustace wanted them there, and it certainly wasn't because he trusted them. A new set of building and safety regulations had been forced onto his land, and legally, he had no way around it. The barn, like everything else he'd ever built, was handcrafted. No machines, no contractors, no paperwork. To him, that wasn't illegal. That was life the way it was meant to be lived. But to the state, it was a violation waiting to be corrected or shut down. And for the first time in his life, Eustace felt something he had never felt on his own land. The fear of losing control. The tension that day was unlike anything the people around him had ever seen. He stood outside the barn like a man guarding something far more valuable than tools or supplies. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't calm either. There was a heaviness in his eyes, the kind that comes from holding on to something for so long that letting it go feels like handing over a piece of your soul. Even the inspectors seemed to feel it. They expected resistance, maybe even a confrontation, but what they got was something stranger. Eustace wasn't fighting them. He was stalling. Almost like he was delaying a moment he knew would change everything. People started whispering. Some thought the barn held animals. Others assumed rare artifacts, dangerous equipment, illegal storage, or maybe just more of Eustace's survival gear. But there was something deeper, something in the way he stood between them and that old wooden door, that made it clear the truth was nothing anyone had guessed. One of the men who'd known Eustace for 20 years later admitted he had never seen him look so emotionally cornered. It was like someone was forcing him to open a casket he wasn't ready to look inside, he said. That barn wasn't a storage place. It was a memory he'd been trying to protect. And the strange thing was, even the land felt different. The wind stopped. The birds didn't call. The world seemed to pause around that old structure, as if every living thing refused to witness what was about to happen next. Eustace finally placed his hand on the door, but he didn't open it. Instead, he took a long breath, and for the first time in front of strangers, he said something no one expected. What's inside here is not just mine. It belongs to the past, and once it's seen, it can't be put back. The inspectors thought he was being dramatic. But the people watching, the few who truly knew him, understood. This wasn't about a barn. This was about something he had buried in wood, dust, and time. Something he had carried longer than he ever admitted. And now, whether he wanted to or not, the door was going to open. And the moment it did, everything the world thought it knew about Eustace Conway was going to change forever. The silence that followed felt heavier than the wood the barn was built from. Every eye was fixed on the door as Eustace finally unlatched it, his hand trembling in a way no one had ever seen from a man who could skin a deer, build a cabin, and tame a wild horse without blinking. For years he had lived like a legend, a symbol of strength, independence, and absolute self-reliance. But in that moment, he didn't look like a man who owned 1,000 acres. He looked like someone trying to keep the past from swallowing him whole. When the door creaked open, the smell of old wood, dust, and time rushed out, like a breath held for decades. The inspectors expected tools, maybe illegal wiring, maybe even animals that didn't meet regulations. But what they saw instead stopped them where they stood. Against the back wall of the barn, covered by a tarp and surrounded by objects carefully arranged like a shrine, was something none of them had expected. A fully preserved collection of items belonging to someone who clearly wasn't Eustace. A stack of clothing that didn't match his style. A backpack, still packed as if the owner had planned to return. Faded photos pinned to the wood, showing a younger Eustace beside another man. A man with the same jawline, the same eyes, the same build, but a different smile. Handwritten letters, never mailed, and a pair of boots that looked worn but never thrown away. You didn't need to ask who they belonged to. You could feel it. No one spoke, but the air changed. Even the inspectors, trained to enforce rules, not emotions, knew they weren't standing in a storage space. They were standing in a grave made of memory. Someone hadn't just lived here. Someone had vanished from here. And whatever happened, Eustace had been carrying it alone for years. One of the men finally broke the silence and asked who the items belonged to, but Eustace didn't answer. He just stared at the wall, the same way someone stares at a photo of a person they know they will never see again. His voice came slow, almost broken, when he finally spoke. He was my brother, and everything in here was all I had left. The inspectors didn't know how to react. The public didn't know he had a brother. The show never mentioned it. Interviewers never asked, and Eustace never volunteered it. Not because he wanted to hide it, but because he didn't want to relive it. He said nothing else, but every detail in that barn told the story he couldn't say out loud. Two boys who grew up wild together, two dreams built in the same dirt, and a future that was supposed to be shared, until one of them never came back. There were newspaper clippings in one corner, yellowed and creased, mentioning a hiking accident that happened long before cameras ever found Eustace. A missing person report, a search that ended too early, a family no one checked on once the headlines faded. That barn wasn't a workshop. It was a place where he kept everything the world forgot, a place where he could talk to a brother who never got the chance to grow old with him, a place where time froze, so grief couldn't swallow what was left. The inspectors didn't touch a thing. They didn't take pictures. They didn't write notes. Some rules aren't written on paper. They live in the spaces where pain has been quietly stored away. And for the first time in a very long time, Eustace wasn't the wild mountain man on television. He wasn't the survival expert. He wasn't the legend. He was just a man who spent years building a life out of wood and earth because it was the only way he knew how to keep from falling apart. And the most heartbreaking part? No one knew this until today. Not the viewers. Not the crew. Not even the people who worked beside him on the land. What they found in that barn wasn't illegal. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't even something that could be taken from him. But the world was about to learn. Exactly why he never let anyone inside, and why opening that door may have been the hardest moment of his entire life. When the barn door finally closed again, it wasn't the sound of wood that lingered. It was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that comes after a confession too heavy for words. Eustace stood there for a long time, staring at the ground, his hands resting against the rough door he had built decades ago. For most people, what was found inside would have been an ending. For him, it was something else. It was a moment of truth that had waited far too long to be spoken out loud. In the days that followed, the story began to spread quietly through the community, and then to the people who had worked beside him for years. They all said the same thing. They had never seen Eustace so still. The man who once taught others how to live off the land now seemed like he was learning how to breathe again. It wasn't anger that held him anymore. It was release. That barn had been his sanctuary and his prison. For years, he believed keeping his brother's memory hidden was the only way to protect it from the noise of the world. But when the door was forced open, something unexpected happened. He realized the memory hadn't been destroyed. It had finally been shared. People came to him afterward, offering sympathy, help, or even money to restore the barn. But Eustace didn't want any of that. He didn't want attention or pity. He just wanted time. For the first time, he spoke openly about his brother, about the life they once dreamed of building together, a place where people could live free, honest, and connected to the land. That dream had never really died. It had just been buried under grief, And now, with everything finally in the open, he began to rebuild not just the barn, but himself. The production team behind Mountain Men reached out too. They wanted to include the story in the show to let viewers understand why Eustace had always lived the way he did, distant, quiet, driven by something invisible. But he refused, not out of shame, but out of love. Some stories, he said, are not meant to be told on camera. Some belong only to the people who lived them. It was the same principle he'd lived by all his life. Protect what matters. Share only what teaches. In a rare interview months later, Eustace finally mentioned the incident, speaking carefully, every word weighted with meaning. "We build barns to store what we need," he said softly. "But sometimes we build them to hold what we can't let go of. And when you open them again, it's not about losing something. It's about realizing it's been waiting for you to come back." Those who listened never forgot that line. It wasn't just about a building or a discovery. It was about grief, love, and the strange way time preserves the things we're not ready to face. The barn still stands today, older, quieter, but different. The doors aren't locked anymore. Eustace keeps them open during the day, letting the wind move through. Sometimes he's seen sitting inside, reading one of the old letters, smiling faintly like a man who has finally found peace in the pain. He's 60 now, and though his body moves slower, there's a calmness in him that wasn't there before. He's still living off the land, still teaching, still reminding people that life isn't about what you own. It's about what you carry inside. And maybe that's why his story feels so human. Because behind all the survival, all the hard work, and all the mystery, there was just a man trying to hold on to someone he loved. The world may remember Eustace Conway as the mountain man who lived differently, but those who've seen that old barn know the truth. He wasn't escaping the world. He was learning how to live with it, one quiet day at a time.